Shadows do not always announce their arrival. Sometimes they sit quietly among the faithful, sharing bread, listening to truth, and walking beside holiness itself. This story begins in such a place, close to the light, close to the promise, close enough to touch eternity, yet far enough to fall into ruin. Long before the night of betrayal unfolded, sacred writings whispered of a coming fracture. A trusted companion would turn, a familiar hand would trade loyalty for silver, a sign of affection would become the signal for arrest, every detail etched into history long before the moment arrived. Among the 12 stood a man entrusted with responsibility, proximity, and purpose. He heard the teachings, he witnessed the miracles, he watched mercy heal the broken and truth confront the powerful. Still, something unseen was taking shape within him. Desire wrestled with devotion, ambition clashed with allegiance, and the tension between light and darkness reached its breaking point. 30 pieces of silver would change hands. A field meant for clay would become a grave, and a kiss, meant to express loyalty, would seal a fate that still unsettles hearts today. This is the story of Judas Iscariot, a name spoken with sorrow, confusion, and warning. Was he driven by forces beyond his control, or did he slowly surrender to choices he refused to confront? Did evil claim him against his will, or did he make room for it step by step? As this account unfolds, we are faced with a sobering truth. Proximity to holiness does not guarantee faithfulness. And the line between devotion and betrayal can be crossed quietly, one decision at a time. From the very start, the Son of God was aware of who would turn against him. Still, he knelt and washed the feet of the one who would betray him. He shared meals with him, broke bread at the same table, and spoke to him as a companion. Even when the fatal kiss met his face, he did not recoil. This moment stands as far more than a historical event. It is fulfillment made visible, destiny unfolding in human form. It is the account of a follower whose life confirmed that sacred words stand firm, and whose end became a lasting caution etched into time itself. Jesus was shaping something remarkable. He was assembling a group of men who would stay close to him, absorb his teachings, and eventually carry his message across nations. These men were not theologians or rulers. They were everyday workers, fishermen, tax collectors, laborers, men accustomed to rough hands, long days, and ordinary routines. Among those he summoned was a man named Judas. In Matthew chapter 10, verses 2-4, the names of the 12 apostles are recorded. Simon, known as Peter, and his brother Andrew. James, the son of Zebedee, and John, his brother. Philip and Bartholomew. Thomas and Matthew, the tax collector. James, the son of Alphaeus and Thaddeus. Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot, the one who would later betray him. Judas is consistently placed last in every listing of the 12. His name always carries the shadowed description tied to his future actions. Yet at this stage, that outcome had not occurred. At this point, Judas stood among the chosen, equal with the others. His full name reveals important details about his background. The surname Iscariot most likely indicates that Judas came from Iscariot, a town in Judea, in the southern region of Israel. This set him apart from the others. Most of the disciples were from Galilee in the north. They shared similar speech patterns, livelihoods connected to fishing, and common regional customs. Judas did not share that background. He was different, a southerner among northerners. Still, Jesus selected him. Jesus looked at Judas and welcomed him into the closest circle. He extended to him the same opportunity given to the rest, the chance to witness everything, learn everything, and take part in a movement unlike anything the world had seen. The Gospels do not record the exact moment Judas was called, unlike the detailed accounts of Peter leaving his nets or Matthew stepping away from his tax booth. But the call was made, and Judas responded. He abandoned his former life and joined a traveling group following a teacher from Nazareth whose words carried authority and whose actions defied explanation. Being one of the 12 carried weight. It required trust and responsibility. Someone needed to oversee the practical matters of their mission. As Jesus and his disciples moved from place to place, they relied on shared resources for food, shelter, and necessities. Supporters contributed financially, but organization was required to manage those funds responsibly. That responsibility fell to Judas. John chapter 13, verse 29 reveals this role. When Jesus spoke to Judas during the final meal, some assumed he was instructing him to purchase supplies for the feast or to give aid to the poor because Judas was in charge of the money. The implication is clear. Judas handled the common funds. He managed what others gave in support of the ministry. When provisions were needed, he made the purchases. When aid was extended to those in need, he facilitated it. Judas controlled the finances. This speaks volumes. Jesus entrusted him with shared resources. Out of all 12, Judas was selected to handle money belonging to the entire group. That position demanded integrity, discipline, and dependability. The other disciples accepted this arrangement without objection. When something needed to be bought, they relied on Judas. When questions arose about resources, he answered them. His role carried influence. Money often does. He knew the amounts, the sources, and the expenditures. The group depended on him daily. Authority naturally accompanies control of resources, and for a time, everything appeared orderly. Judas journeyed with the others, overseeing transactions and maintaining financial stability as they moved through Galilee and Judea. His proximity gave him access to more than money. He witnessed extraordinary events firsthand. Day after day, he observed acts that defied human limitation. He watched Jesus heal the sick. Matthew chapter 4, verses 23 and 24 describe how Jesus traveled throughout Galilee, teaching in synagogues, proclaiming the kingdom, and restoring those afflicted with every kind of illness. News spread rapidly. People brought the suffering, those plagued by disease, pain, spiritual oppression, seizures, and paralysis. And they were restored. Judas saw it all. Those unable to walk rose and moved freely. Blind eyes opened. Skin conditions vanished at a touch. Fevers ended instantly. Lingering pain disappeared. These were immediate, unmistakable changes. He was present when Jesus confronted a violent storm. Mark chapter 4, verses 37 through 39 recount how fierce winds battered the boat until it began filling with water. Jesus, asleep, was awakened by fearful cries. He stood and commanded the wind and the sea to be still, and the chaos ceased. Judas was there. He felt the fear. He believed death was imminent. Then he watched nature submit to a spoken command. He also took part in feeding a massive crowd with limited provisions. John chapter 6, verses 9 through 13 recount how 5 barley loaves and 2 fish were given, multiplied, and distributed. Judas helped pass the food. He watched it continue without shortage. Thousands ate until satisfied. 12 baskets of leftovers remained. The numbers defied logic, yet the evidence was undeniable. He was also present when lives were restored after death. These were not brief recoveries or near-death moments. These were unmistakable reversals. These were people whose deaths were unquestionable. Their bodies had already begun to break down, and yet when Jesus spoke, they stood up and lived again. This happened repeatedly. Sign after sign, Judas witnessed every moment. These were not distant accounts passed along by others. He was present. He watched it unfold with his own eyes. But what Jesus did extended far beyond acts of power. He spoke with a depth of insight and command that left crowds stunned, and Judas heard every word. He was there when Jesus delivered what would become one of the most well-known teachings ever spoken. Recorded in the Gospel of Matthew, chapters 5 through 7, Jesus addressed the nature of true fulfillment. He declared that those who recognize their spiritual need belong to the kingdom of heaven. He said that those who grieve will receive comfort, that the gentle will inherit the earth. Judas listened as Jesus described what it meant to live as a visible influence in the world, like salt that preserves and light that exposes darkness. He heard teachings that overturned expectations, including the call to love those who oppose you. In Matthew chapter 5, verses 43 through 45, Jesus challenged the common belief of loving friends and rejecting enemies. Instead, he commanded love toward adversaries and prayer for those who cause harm, explaining that this reflects the character of the Father in heaven. Judas also learned how to pray. Jesus gave them words that would shape generations. In Matthew chapter 6, verses 9 to 13, Jesus instructed them to address God as Father, to honor his name, to long for his rule, and to desire his purposes on earth as they are fulfilled in heaven. They were taught to ask for daily provision, to extend forgiveness as they received it, and to seek protection from temptation and evil. Judas heard Jesus describe the reign of God through stories drawn from everyday life. He spoke of farmers scattering seed, of fields with both crops and weeds, of hidden riches discovered unexpectedly, of pearls worth everything, of nets cast wide, and of celebrations prepared for honored guests. He listened as Jesus addressed wealth and possessions. In Matthew chapter 6, verse 24, Jesus stated plainly that divided allegiance is impossible. A person will cling to one master and reject the other. Devotion cannot be shared between God and money. Those words should have struck Judas deeply, especially in light of what would later be revealed about his connection to wealth. But at that moment, he heard them as one among many. He sat in the crowd when Jesus spoke about fear and reliance on God. Matthew chapter 6, verses 31 through 33 record Jesus telling them not to live consumed by anxiety over food, drink, or clothing. He explained that God already knows what his children need and called them to prioritize God's kingdom and righteousness, trusting that everything else would follow. Judas heard teachings about evaluating others, about persistence in prayer, about the narrow path that leads to life. They relied fully on God's provision and the generosity of those who welcomed their message. And it succeeded. They preached. People were healed. Demons were expelled. Luke chapter 9 verse 6 states that they went from village to village, announcing the good news and bringing healing everywhere. Judas was part of that mission. He personally experienced God's power working through him. He witnessed people restored through words he spoke under Jesus' authority. He saw unclean spirits flee when he commanded them to go. When the disciples returned, their response was marked by joy and amazement. Luke chapter 10, verse 17, describes a later group returning with excitement, amazed that even demons obeyed them in Jesus' name. Judas understood that feeling. He had felt the surge of being used by God. He had taken part in something far greater than himself, a movement reshaping lives and revealing that God's kingdom was pressing into the world. He was more than a caretaker of funds. He was an active representative of the message, empowered to heal, deliver, and proclaim hope. Yet beneath all of this, something was deteriorating. While Judas traveled with Jesus, participated in ministry, and oversaw finances, something dark was taking root within him. The Gospel of John, chapter 12, verse 6, exposes a troubling reality about Judas. Before addressing the specific event, John gives insight into Judas's nature. He was not merely responsible for managing the money, he was stealing from it. While he handled funds meant to support the group and care for those in need, he was secretly taking what was not his, likely in small amounts, carefully enough to avoid drawing attention. Small amounts taken here and there, quietly skimmed before the donations were counted, or by exaggerating expenses and keeping what remained. This was not a brief lapse in judgment or a single poor choice. The original language points to repeated, ongoing behavior. Judas had been doing this consistently. It was a settled habit, a hidden pattern of wrongdoing he deliberately kept out of sight from the rest. Consider what this reveals even before the final act of betrayal. Jesus had entrusted Judas with the shared finances. The other disciples depended on his honesty. Supporters gave sacrificially, believing their gifts would advance the mission they believed in. All the while, Judas was taking from it. Each time he reached into that money bag for personal gain, he was placing himself above Jesus. He was choosing wealth over character. Outwardly, he walked alongside Jesus. Inwardly, he was serving himself. What deepens the tragedy is where this was happening. Judas was present as Jesus warned about the danger of greed. He watched lives restored, bodies healed, and crowds fed. He actively participated in the work, yet his heart moved in the opposite direction. The gap between what he witnessed and how he lived should have been impossible to ignore. Somehow, he suppressed whatever inner warning might have stopped him. He observed signs of divine power, but allowed none of it to reshape him. While he handled funds meant to support the group and care for those in need, he was secretly taking what was not his. Likely in small amounts, carefully enough to avoid drawing attention. Small amounts taken here and there, quietly skimmed before the donations were counted, or by exaggerating expenses and keeping what remained. This was not a brief lapse in judgment or a single poor choice. The original language points to repeated, ongoing behavior. Judas had been doing this consistently. It was a settled habit, a hidden pattern of wrongdoing he deliberately kept out of sight from the rest. Consider what this reveals even before the final act of betrayal. Jesus had entrusted Judas with the shared finances. The other disciples depended on his honesty. Supporters gave sacrificially, believing their gifts would advance the mission they believed in. All the while, Judas was taking from it. Each time he reached into that money bag for personal gain, he was placing himself above Jesus. He was choosing wealth over character. Outwardly, he walked alongside Jesus. Inwardly, he was serving himself. What deepens the tragedy is where this was happening. Judas was present as Jesus warned about the danger of greed. He watched lives restored, bodies healed, and crowds fed. He actively participated in the work, yet his heart moved in the opposite direction. The gap between what he witnessed and how he lived should have been impossible to ignore. Somehow, he suppressed whatever inner warning might have stopped him. He observed signs of divine power, but allowed none of it to reshape him. He listened to truth, but refused to let it confront his own actions. He even exercised authority in Jesus' name while stealing from him. This is the perilous position Judas reached, physically close, spiritually distant, included among the 12, yet inwardly detached from everything they represented. Then an event occurred that pulled his true motives into the open. It took place in Bethany, a village near Jerusalem, inside the home of Simon, a man once afflicted with leprosy and now healed. John's account, chapter 12, verses 1 through 3, situates this moment 6 days before Passover. Jesus arrived in Bethany, where Lazarus lived, the same Lazarus who had been raised from death. A meal was prepared in Jesus' honor. Martha served, and Lazarus reclined at the table with him. Then Mary stepped forward carrying a large quantity of costly ointment made from pure nard. She applied it to Jesus' feet and wiped them with her hair. The aroma spread throughout the entire house. What unfolded was an uncommon and striking expression of devotion. Mary had taken a full pound of pure nard, an imported fragrance of extraordinary value, and broke open its container. Instead of anointing his head, which was more customary, she poured it on his feet. She then loosened her hair, an act considered socially improper, and used it to wipe them. The fragrance lingered everywhere. The scene was tender, extravagant, and deeply personal. She offered her most prized possession to honor Jesus. This was no small bottle tucked away for special occasions. The poor were not his concern. The money was. Had the perfume been sold and the proceeds given to support the group, the funds would have passed through the money bag under Judas's control. 300 denarii represented a rare chance to take far more than usual without drawing attention. The greater the amount flowing through his hands, the greater his personal gain. Mary's gift bypassed his control, and that infuriated him. His protest had nothing to do with generosity and everything to do with greed. He wrapped self-interest in spiritual language, presenting himself as compassionate while concealing his real intent. But Jesus saw through it. He always did. John chapter 12, verses 7 and 8 records Jesus' response. Jesus said to leave her alone. Her act was being preserved for the time of his burial. The poor would always be present, but he would not. Jesus publicly defended Mary and instructed the others to stop troubling her. What she had done was right. More than that, it carried meaning beyond what she may have realized. Her actions pointed ahead to what was coming. Then Jesus made a statement that likely struck Judas sharply. The poor would remain, but Jesus would not. This was not indifference toward those in need. Jesus consistently showed compassion for them. He was highlighting the uniqueness of that moment, an opportunity that would soon pass. Mary recognized its value. In doing so, Jesus also revealed the emptiness of Judas's argument. If Judas truly cared, there had been countless chances to act. Jesus' time with them was limited, and that reality gave weight to what Mary had done. Matthew chapter 26, verses 10 through 13, expands on Jesus' words. Aware of the criticism, Jesus said, "Why are you troubling this woman? She has done something beautiful for me. You will always have the poor with you, but you will not always have me, in pouring this ointment on my body. She did this in preparation for my burial. Truly, I tell you, wherever this good news is proclaimed throughout the world, what she has done will also be spoken of in remembrance of her." Jesus described Mary's action as beautiful. He declared that it would never be forgotten, setting her sincere devotion against the hollow criticism of those who challenged her. For Judas, this moment carried the weight of a public correction. Even though Jesus did not single him out by name, the challenge struck its mark. Judas's objection had been exposed for what it truly was. His inner intentions, though never openly confessed, were fully known by Jesus. Something within Judas hardened. In that instant, the distance between him and Jesus, already widening with every dishonest coin he had taken, became a vast separation. That separation would soon lead Judas toward one of the most infamous choices ever made. A shift occurred in the unseen realm. The bitterness that had been quietly growing in Judas's heart created an opening, and a dark power seized the opportunity. The Gospel of Luke, chapter 22, verses 1 through 3, records what unfolded. The Feast of Unleavened Bread, known as the Passover, was approaching. The chief priests and scribes were searching for a way to put Jesus to death, yet they were afraid of the people. Then Satan entered Judas, called Iscariot, one of the 12. Satan entered Judas. This was not a distant temptation. This was a direct and personal intrusion of evil into a human heart. The Greek term used here carries the meaning of entering into, moving inside, taking possession. Satan did not merely whisper ideas from afar. He took up residence. How does such an entry occur? Scripture does not outline the mechanics in detail, but it does reveal the conditions. Judas had been stealing for an unknown length of time. He had lived a double existence, presenting himself as a follower of Jesus while quietly serving his own greed. He had just experienced an indirect rebuke. When Jesus defended Mary's act of worship, Judas's heart grew colder. Each decision to place money above integrity further darkened him. In that condition, he became exposed to something far more destructive than his own wrongdoing. He opened the door, and evil crossed the threshold. This was not possession in the sense of losing awareness or the ability to choose. Judas still acted intentionally. He still made deliberate decisions. But now a malevolent force was operating alongside him, driving him toward ruin. The timing matters. Passover was near, the great festival commemorating God's deliverance of Israel from slavery in Egypt. Jerusalem was filling with pilgrims from every direction. Religious intensity was high, and the city was crowded. The leaders were searching for a way to seize Jesus without igniting unrest among the people who admired him. Into this tense environment stepped Judas. Now under satanic influence, what had once been quiet resentment turned into active plotting. What had been secret theft was about to become open betrayal. Judas made a choice. He would approach the religious authorities and offer them exactly what they lacked: direct access to Jesus. Luke chapter 22, verses 4 through 6 explains the next step. Judas went away and discussed with the chief priests and officers how he might betray Jesus to them. They were pleased and agreed to give him money. He accepted their offer and began looking for a chance to hand Jesus over when no crowd was present. Judas approached the chief priests, the religious power brokers of Israel, men who controlled the temple and wielded authority under Roman rule. They had been searching for a way to arrest Jesus, but they faced a serious obstacle. Jesus was popular. A public arrest during daylight hours, surrounded by supporters, could spark a riot. Then Judas arrived, one of Jesus' own disciples, offering a solution. He would deliver Jesus to them privately, away from the crowds. He knew Jesus' routines. He knew where he prayed. He knew when he would be vulnerable. The chief priests were overjoyed. This was precisely what they needed, an insider willing to betray his teacher, someone who could lead them to Jesus at night when the crowds were absent. Under the law of Moses, if an ox gored a slave, male or female, the owner was required to pay the master 30 shekels of silver, and the ox was to be stoned. 30 pieces of silver represented the compensation for a slave's accidental death. It was the lowest valuation of human life in that culture. The religious leaders were doing more than assigning a price to Jesus. They were declaring him worth no more than a dead slave. The prophet Zechariah had foreseen this exact amount centuries earlier. In Zechariah chapter 11, verses 12 and 13, the prophecy reads, "So I said to them, if it seems good to you, give me my wages, but if not, keep them. And they weighed out my wages, 30 pieces of silver. Then the Lord said to me, throw it to the potter, the magnificent price at which I was valued by them." Even the prophet recognized the insult in that sum, the so-called magnificent price placed upon him. What had once been prophecy was now unfolding precisely as written. Judas accepted the money. 30 pieces of silver clinked together in his purse, the value placed on his master's life. He exchanged Jesus for roughly 4 months' wages, the worth of a slave, an amount that would have been seen as degrading by any measure. Luke chapter 22, verse 6 tells us what followed. Judas agreed and began searching for the right moment to betray Jesus when no crowd was present. From that point forward, he watched carefully. He waited. He looked for the precise opportunity when Jesus would be separated from the multitudes who followed him. He required seclusion, cover of night, a window of time when officials could seize Jesus without drawing public attention until it was already done. Judas went back to the group carrying what no one else knew. The payment was secured and hidden. The arrangement with the chief priests was finalized. All that remained was patience, waiting for the precise moment to carry out the act he had agreed to perform. Passover arrived. This marked the most significant observance in the Jewish year, a remembrance of Israel's deliverance from bondage in Egypt. Families gathered to share the Passover meal, recalling the night judgment passed over the homes marked with the blood of a lamb. It was a time shaped by memory, ritual, and shared identity. Jesus sent Peter and John ahead to make the preparations. Luke's account explains that the day of unleavened bread had come, the time when the Passover lamb was sacrificed. Jesus instructed them to go and prepare the meal so they could eat together. They asked where this should be done. He told them that upon entering the city, they would encounter a man carrying a jar of water. They were to follow him to the house he entered and speak to the owner, saying that the teacher asked where the guest room was, in which he could share the Passover with his disciples. They were told the man would show them a large upper room, already arranged and furnished, and that they should prepare the meal there. Peter and John went, found everything exactly as described, and made the necessary preparations. The room was ready. The lamb, the unleavened bread, the bitter herbs, the wine. Everything required for the observance was in place. Nothing was missing. When evening came, Jesus arrived with the 12. Luke's narrative describes the moment. When the hour arrived, Jesus reclined at the table with the apostles and told them how deeply he had longed to eat this Passover with them before what lay ahead. He was fully aware of what was approaching. He knew this would be the final meal he would share with them before his death. This time together mattered to him. They reclined around a low table, following the custom of important meals. resting on one side, supported by the left arm, eating with the right. The arrangement likely formed a circle or a U-shape around the table. Judas was there among them. He took his place like the rest, sharing in the meal, appearing no different from the others. He spoke when addressed, joined the rituals, likely sang the traditional songs. Outwardly, nothing set him apart. Inwardly, he carried the knowledge of what he had already committed to do. He knew the money was waiting. He knew that before the night ended, he would guide armed men to seize the teacher seated beside him. As the meal continued, something unexpected occurred. Jesus stood up. John's account explains that he rose from the table, set aside his outer garments, took a towel and tied it around his waist. He poured water into a basin and began washing the disciples' feet, drying them with the towel. This action stunned the room. Foot washing was reserved for the lowest servant. Roads were dusty, sandals were open, and feet were filthy by day's end. A household servant performed this task. A host never did. A teacher certainly never did this for his students. Yet Jesus, whom they called Lord and Teacher, took on the posture of a servant and washed their feet one by one. When he reached Peter, resistance followed. Peter asked how his Lord could wash his feet. Jesus replied that Peter did not yet grasp what was happening but would understand later. Peter insisted it would never happen. Jesus responded that unless he washed him, Peter would have no part with him. Alarmed, Peter reversed course, asking for his hands and head as well. Jesus explained that one who has already bathed needs only their feet washed. What matters here is this: Judas's feet were washed too. John records that Jesus acknowledged not all were clean because he knew who would betray him. Jesus was fully aware of Judas's intentions. He knew the agreement had been made, the payment accepted. Even so, he knelt before Judas and washed his feet. He touched the feet of the man who would soon hand him over. He served someone actively plotting against him. This act stood as a final appeal to Judas's conscience, a demonstration of humility and love expressed through action. Instead of exposing or condemning him, Jesus chose service. Every chance to turn back was given. After washing their feet, Jesus put his garments back on and returned to the table. He asked whether they understood what he had done. They called him Teacher and Lord, and he affirmed that title. If he, their Teacher and Lord, had washed their feet, then they were to do the same for one another. He explained that he had set an example for them to follow. He was teaching them about humility, service, and how to treat one another. Judas heard every word while guarding his secret. As the evening progressed, the emotional weight intensified. Jesus became visibly troubled. John describes how he spoke with solemn clarity, declaring that one of them would betray him. The disciples looked at each other, uncertain and shaken. The realization struck hard. The betrayal would not come from an outsider, not from an enemy beyond the room, but from one of their own. One of the 12, one of the men seated at the table. Confusion and sorrow spread among them. Matthew records that each disciple began asking one after another whether it could be them. Each questioned his own heart, aware of personal weakness. Judas asked as well. He addressed Jesus as Rabbi, not Lord. Jesus replied that Judas had said it himself. The meaning was unmistakable. The truth was spoken plainly, even as the moment continued unfolding. The exchange happened quietly, subtle enough that the rest of the disciples couldn't clearly hear what was being said. Confusion still lingered around the table. No one truly knew who the betrayer was. Peter, wanting clarity but unwilling to ask aloud, signaled to John to speak up. John was seated beside Jesus, reclining in the place of honor, close enough to communicate without drawing attention. John leaned back toward Jesus, close enough to speak softly, his voice shielded from the others. Around them, the remaining disciples were unsettled. Faces showed worry and disbelief as eyes searched the table. Someone among them, someone trusted, someone who had walked beside them, served alongside them, shared meals and ministry, was about to betray Jesus. But no one knew who. John quietly asked Jesus to identify the one responsible. Jesus answered by explaining that the betrayer would be revealed through a simple act. He would receive a piece of bread that Jesus dipped and handed to him personally. Moments later, Jesus dipped the bread and placed it into the hands of Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot. This action was intentional. In that culture, when a host dipped bread and gave it directly to someone, it symbolized closeness, respect, and personal regard. It was a sign of honor, not rejection. What makes the moment so striking is that Jesus knew exactly what Judas was planning. He had already announced that betrayal was imminent, and still, he extended this gesture of goodwill. Jesus offered Judas a final expression of kindness, a final opportunity, a quiet invitation to turn back. Even knowing Judas had already agreed to hand him over for money, Jesus responded with grace instead of condemnation. This was not exposure or accusation, it was mercy offered one last time. Judas accepted the bread, and something dark followed. After taking it, a profound shift occurred within him. Whatever restraint had existed was gone. He fully surrendered to the path he had chosen. That sacred place, once used for solitude and prayer, would soon become the site of betrayal. Armed men would arrive under cover of darkness. Judas would guide them himself. Back in the upper room, the remaining 11 stayed with Jesus. They did not follow Judas. They had no idea where he had gone or what he was preparing to do. They believed he was handling an errand. Jesus continued the meal with them. He spoke, taught, and prepared them for what lay ahead. He shared bread and wine, urging them to remember him. He prayed for them and strengthened them for the coming hours. Judas was absent for all of it. While the others remained with Jesus, Judas moved through the night, gathering those who would carry out the arrest. Plans were finalized. Forces were assembled. After the meal concluded, Jesus led the 11 out of the city. They walked through the shadowed streets, crossed the valley below, and made their way toward the garden on the Mount of Olives, a place Jesus visited often. At the same time, Judas assembled a large group. He secured soldiers and officials, bringing lanterns, torches, and weapons. This was not a small patrol. It was a significant force prepared for resistance, advancing toward the place where Judas knew Jesus would be waiting. With them came representatives of the religious leadership, along with guards assigned to enforce their authority. These were temple officers acting on orders from the highest ranks. They moved through the night carrying lanterns and flaming torches to cut through the darkness. John leaned back toward Jesus, close enough to speak softly, his voice shielded from the others. Around them, the remaining disciples were unsettled. Faces showed worry and disbelief as eyes searched the table. Someone among them, someone trusted, someone who had walked beside them, served alongside them, shared meals and ministry, was about to betray Jesus. But no one knew who. John quietly asked Jesus to identify the one responsible. Jesus answered by explaining that the betrayer would be revealed through a simple act. He would receive a piece of bread that Jesus dipped and handed to him personally. Moments later, Jesus dipped the bread and placed it into the hands of Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot. This action was intentional. In that culture, when a host dipped bread and gave it directly to someone, it symbolized closeness, respect, and personal regard. It was a sign of honor, not rejection. What makes the moment so striking is that Jesus knew exactly what Judas was planning. He had already announced that betrayal was imminent, and still, he extended this gesture of goodwill. Jesus offered Judas a final expression of kindness, a final opportunity, a quiet invitation to turn back. Even knowing Judas had already agreed to hand him over for money, Jesus responded with grace instead of condemnation. This was not exposure or accusation, it was mercy offered one last time. Judas accepted the bread, and something dark followed. After taking it, a profound shift occurred within him. Whatever restraint had existed was gone. He fully surrendered to the path he had chosen. That sacred place, once used for solitude and prayer, would soon become the site of betrayal. Armed men would arrive under cover of darkness. Judas would guide them himself. Back in the upper room, the remaining 11 stayed with Jesus. They did not follow Judas. They had no idea where he had gone or what he was preparing to do. They believed he was handling an errand. Jesus continued the meal with them. He spoke, taught, and prepared them for what lay ahead. He shared bread and wine, urging them to remember him. He prayed for them and strengthened them for the coming hours. Judas was absent for all of it. While the others remained with Jesus, Judas moved through the night, gathering those who would carry out the arrest. Plans were finalized. Forces were assembled. After the meal concluded, Jesus led the 11 out of the city. They walked through the shadowed streets, crossed the valley below, and made their way toward the garden on the Mount of Olives, a place Jesus visited often. At the same time, Judas assembled a large group. He secured soldiers and officials, bringing lanterns, torches, and weapons. This was not a small patrol. It was a significant force prepared for resistance, advancing toward the place where Judas knew Jesus would be waiting. With them came representatives of the religious leadership, along with guards assigned to enforce their authority. These were temple officers acting on orders from the highest ranks. They moved through the night carrying lanterns and flaming torches to cut through the darkness. Weapons were in their hands, swords and heavy clubs, ready for confrontation if it came to that. This was not a quiet visit. It was an operation planned with force in mind. At that moment, while Jesus was still speaking to those with him, Judas appeared. He was one of the 12, and he did not come alone. Behind him was a large group armed with blades and sticks, sent by the senior religious officials, legal scholars, and community elders. This was no random gathering. It was an organized unit, backed by the ruling council, determined to carry out an arrest without interference. They were unwilling to risk failure. Their goal was clear. Jesus was to be taken into custody, and nothing would be left to chance. Judas guided them under the cover of night. He knew the location well. He had been there many times before. He understood the layout, the familiar paths, the olive trees, the quiet places where Jesus often withdrew to pray. That knowledge should have remained private. Instead, it was being used to betray trust. Personal moments were turned into tools. The group followed Judas across the valley and up toward the garden. Torchlight danced across the landscape, casting restless shadows. Footsteps filled the air. Metal struck metal as weapons shifted with every step. The night carried the sound of their approach. They were closing in, and Judas was leading them straight to him. Before arriving, Judas had already arranged a signal. While Jesus was still speaking, Judas stepped forward with the armed crowd close behind him. The plan was simple and unmistakable. The sign was a kiss. In that culture, a kiss on the cheek was a common greeting, especially between a student and a teacher. It expressed honor, closeness, and respect. Judas chose that gesture as his marker. Of all possible ways to identify Jesus, he selected one meant to communicate affection. Consider the distortion in that choice. He could have pointed. He could have spoken a name. Instead, he used a symbol of loyalty as the method of betrayal. Something meant to express devotion was reshaped into an act of deception. Judas approached without hesitation. He spoke warmly. "Greetings, teacher." Then he kissed him, not briefly, but with emphasis, as though to convince anyone watching that this was genuine affection. But Jesus understood the meaning behind it. He responded calmly, "Do what you came to do." Even in that moment, there was no insult, no condemnation. Jesus addressed him as a friend. The word carried weight. It acknowledged their history, even as that history was being broken. Then came a question, spoken directly to Judas. One last invitation to reflect. "Would you betray me with a kiss?" The question lingered. It exposed the gravity of what had just taken place. A gesture meant to express love had been turned into a signal for capture. The moment offered Judas a chance to stop, to recognize the cost of his choice. But the moment passed. The signal had been given. The men now knew who they were there for. As they moved forward, Jesus stepped ahead of everyone else. He did not hide. He did not retreat. He asked them who they were seeking. It describes a young follower who had been trailing behind, wearing only a linen covering. When the soldiers tried to seize him, he slipped free, leaving the cloth behind, and fled unclothed into the night. Many believe this young man may have been Mark himself. This moment captures the chaos and terror of the scene. Panic ruled the air. These were the same men who, just hours earlier, had pledged unwavering allegiance. Earlier that evening, each one of them had sworn loyalty. Matthew chapter 26, verse 35 records their words. Peter declared that even death would not cause him to deny Jesus, and the others echoed the same vow. Yet when the test arrived, when danger became real, every promise dissolved. They ran. Jesus was left alone, surrounded by those who meant him harm. What he had foretold earlier was unfolding before their eyes. Mark chapter 14, verse 27 records Jesus' warning that all of them would fall away, that the shepherd would be struck and the flock would scatter. Now that scattering was happening. The disciples disappeared into the shadows, hiding, trying to avoid capture. Jesus, meanwhile, was led away under guard, restrained, without a single close companion by his side. Judas watched everything. He saw the arrest. He saw the disciples flee. His plan had succeeded. Jesus was now bound, headed toward trial and death. The religious leaders had what they wanted, and Judas had received his payment. As time passed, Jesus was brought before the Jewish ruling council, the Sanhedrin. Accusations were raised against him. False testimony was presented. He was mocked, condemned, and declared guilty. As these events unfolded, something inside Judas began to collapse. Matthew chapter 27, verse 3 explains that when Judas saw that Jesus had been condemned, he was filled with regret and returned the silver to the chief priests and elders. The word used to describe his reaction conveys intense remorse and anguish. He understood that what he had done was deeply wrong. This regret, however, was not the same as repentance. It did not move him toward restoration or reconciliation. It was the crushing realization of irreversible damage. Perhaps Judas believed Jesus would escape. Perhaps he assumed the leaders only wanted to intimidate him. Maybe he thought the payment came at little cost, but now Jesus faced execution. The leaders planned to hand him over to Roman authority for crucifixion. Judas could no longer deny the outcome his actions had triggered. Guilt overwhelmed him. He had handed over his teacher, the one who had chosen him, trusted him, shared meals with him, and even washed his feet only hours earlier. Money had been the exchange. Death was the result. Judas could not bear the weight of that truth. Desperate to undo the damage, he gathered the silver and returned to those who had paid him. He went back to the chief priests and elders and tried to give the money back. Matthew chapter 27, verses 3 and 4 record his words. He confessed openly that he had betrayed innocent blood. He admitted his guilt. He declared Jesus to be innocent. He hoped that returning the silver might somehow reverse what had been done. But the leaders refused to accept responsibility. Matthew chapter 27, verse 4 records their reply. They told him his guilt was his own concern. They dismissed him without compassion or concern. They had achieved their goal. Jesus was in custody. Judas had served his purpose. Whatever torment he carried no longer mattered to them. This response exposes the harsh reality of calculated wrongdoing. They had encouraged the betrayal, paid for it, and now washed their hands of the consequences. They showed no remorse, no concern for Judas's condition, no sense of accountability. He stood alone, burdened by guilt, holding payment he could no longer endure to possess. His confession came too late. It could not stop the trial. It could not save Jesus, and it could not rescue Judas himself. The leaders moved forward without hesitation. The agreement had been fulfilled. The exchange was complete, and Judas was left alone with blood money he could no longer carry. Judas could not reverse what he had set in motion. When he went back to the religious authorities, they refused to intervene. The fate of Jesus was sealed, and the weight of responsibility pressed down on him with unbearable force. The burden of what he had done consumed him. He returned to the temple and threw the silver coins onto the floor, abandoning them where they landed. Then he turned away and left. Not long after, he took his own life. He entered the temple, a place regarded as holy, and hurled the 30 silver pieces away. That action carried meaning. It reflected desperation, rejection, and a desire to separate himself from the money that now symbolized betrayal and bloodshed. Once the coins were gone, he walked out and ended his life by hanging himself. The regret overwhelmed him. The guilt crushed every remaining sense of hope. He saw no path forward, no way to live with the consequences of his actions. Another historical account adds disturbing detail to what followed. The land purchased with the reward of his wrongdoing became the site of a violent end. His body fell, burst open, and the scene became known throughout Jerusalem. The place gained a grim reputation and was remembered by a name associated with blood. Whether the fall happened because the rope failed or because of what occurred afterward, the outcome was unmistakable. His death was brutal. His body came to rest in a field that would forever carry the stain of his betrayal. Judas chose death rather than seeking forgiveness. He felt remorse, but he never reached for mercy. He did not believe restoration was possible. He did not return to the one he had betrayed. The man who had once walked closely with Jesus, who had witnessed extraordinary works, listened to powerful teachings, and participated in ministry, died alone, overtaken by despair and self-condemnation. After Judas abandoned the silver inside the temple and disappeared, the religious leaders were left with a problem. They gathered to decide what should be done with the money. They concluded that it could not be placed into the treasury because it was connected to bloodshed. So, they agreed to use it for something else. With those coins, they purchased a potter's field, a parcel of land no longer suitable for its original purpose. It was designated as a burial ground for outsiders, for travelers and foreigners who died in the city without family to claim them. Only then did concerns about legal cleanliness suddenly matter. They had no hesitation paying for betrayal. They showed no restraint in condemning an innocent man through a sham proceeding. Yet now they worried about ceremonial rules, refusing to place the money in the treasury because of its source. The contradiction was glaring. They were meticulous about a technicality, while ignoring the magnitude of the injustice they had carried out. The land they bought had little value, worn down from years of use, but it served their need to dispose of the money without confronting their own guilt. From that point on, the land carried a name tied to violence and betrayal. What appeared to be a series of calculated decisions driven by corruption and fear ultimately shaped events in ways far larger than the individuals involved. The silver, the field, and the bloodshed became permanently linked, and the place would be remembered for generations by a name that reflected exactly how it was obtained. The Book of Acts, chapter 1, verse 19, records an event that became widely known throughout Jerusalem. Word spread so thoroughly among the people that the land was given a name in their own language, Akeldama, meaning the field of blood. This place was not obscure or forgotten. Every resident understood why it bore that name. It stood as a lasting reminder of Judas's betrayal and the tragic end that followed. Long after the moment had passed, people continued to walk by that land. Generations would come and go, each remembering the man who exchanged the life of the Son of God for 30 pieces of silver, only to be overwhelmed by despair and take his own life. The memory attached to that place refused to fade. With Judas gone, the remaining disciples faced an urgent responsibility. His role among the 12 could not remain empty. Acts chapter 1, verses 21 through 26 explains the process they followed to choose a replacement. Peter addressed the group, pointing out that the betrayal and death of Judas had already been spoken of in the Psalms. According to those writings, another had to step into his position, someone who could stand as a witness to the resurrection of Jesus. After prayer and careful consideration, Matthias was selected to take that place among the apostles. Judas's story concludes on land purchased with the price of betrayal. His body was destroyed, and his name became permanently linked with treachery. Though he walked alongside Jesus for 3 years, his heart was never fully yielded. He stood near redemption, yet turned toward condemnation. He experienced regret, but never pursued true repentance. His life became a sobering lesson passed down through the ages, warning of what happens when wealth is chosen over truth, when loyalty is exchanged for momentary reward, and when unchecked sin is allowed to grow until it consumes everything. Stories like this are preserved not merely to recount history, but to challenge the hearts of those who hear them. The account of Judas confronts us with difficult questions about proximity versus commitment, regret versus repentance, and intention versus action. Being close to truth does not guarantee transformation. Walking alongside righteousness does not automatically produce a faithful heart. What ultimately matters is what we choose to do when tested, when desire competes with conviction, and when the cost of obedience feels heavy. This narrative urges reflection. It invites us to examine our own priorities, our motivations, and the direction of our choices. Are we guided by lasting truth or by what offers immediate satisfaction? Do we respond to failure with humility and a willingness to change? Or do we allow shame to isolate and harden us? These are not ancient questions. They are deeply human ones, as relevant now as they were then. If this message stirred something within you, take a moment to sit with it. Think about the lessons you've drawn from this story and how they apply to your own life. What stood out to you most? What emotions did this account bring to the surface? Your perspective matters, and your voice adds depth to this conversation. We invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Let others know what lessons you've learned and how this message impacted you. If you found value here, please like the video, share it with someone who may need to hear it, and subscribe to the channel for more Bible stories and reflections. Your engagement helps keep these stories alive and reaching hearts across the world.